We're going to hold all questions till the end of the presentations from LOC lobbying staff. And do remember that when we move to that Q&A portion, it's an opportunity for questions, not an opportunity for comments. And we do our best to make sure we take questions from LOC members before taking them from non-members. And if you've not yet done so, we would ask that you update your screen profile to reflect the name and the organization that you represent. Today's webinar is going to be really heavy on housing and land use matters, but we're also going to cover information on photo radars, broadband, drones, regionally significant industrial sites, the LOC priority budget requests, the Ways and Means Roadshow, and we will also make a final plea for members to please complete the Recycling Needs Assessment Survey so that you have access to needed funds. And we'll finish out our update today with a general overview of where things stand so far this legislative session. So we're going to kick things up with the heaviest topic that we have, and that's our land use and housing updates. Ariel Nelson, most of whom probably already know her since she's been giving frequent updates this session, is our land use, housing, homelessness lobbyist. Ariel's got several bills to talk to us about today. She's had a long and busy session, but she's going to focus primarily today on Senate Bill 847, which is an omnibus housing bill, House Bill 2506, which deals with residential facility siting, House Bill 3569, which is what we're calling the Right to Housing Bill, and House Bill 3414, which is the governor's housing bill. So Ariel, you've got a lot on your plate and a lot to update the members with today, but let's start with Senate Bill 847, the omnibus housing bill. For myself, I've lost track of the number of amendments that are happening with this bill, but what can you tell us about what it does, where we stand with amendments, and what the members should generally know?
Thanks, Patty. I'm going to try and keep this high level, and if folks have additional questions, I'm happy to get to those in Q&A at the end of the call. Senate Bill 847 is probably where the Senate Housing and Development Committee focused most of their policy focus on this session. On Monday, the committee adopted -19 amendments to Senate Bill 847, and it passed out of committee with a 3-2 vote along party lines. I will focus on a couple pieces that the LOC has been particularly focused on. The committee did not adopt -5 amendments, which we were advocating for, and we were really grateful for the leadership of City of Roseburg City Councilor Ellen Porter in that effort. The -5 amendments would have provided liability protections for safe rest sites in rural communities. So they didn't adopt those amendments, and it means that those are effectively dead for this session, but there are still other bills, other avenues still alive this session that might be amended to include that provision. So we fully intend to keep exploring those, and if you are interested in supporting that effort, please do reach out to myself or to Councilor Porter. The -19 amendments to Senate Bill 847 include a number of policy changes. We were particularly supportive of an extension to the emergency shelter siting provision. This is a critical tool for quickly approving shelters, and it's going to be needed to meet the governor's emergency declaration. There were also updates to the LUBA process in this bill to reduce some of the appeals for local development decisions and make it easier for local governments to streamline their response or involvement in those appeals. The other thing the bill does that we worked on was originally the bill had required all cities not previously required in the middle housing bill from 2019. So cities below a population of 10,000 were going to be required to update their codes to allow duplexes. That was a really large fiscal impact. As you all know, that is costly and requires grant assistance from DLCD. So they narrowed the requirement to only I think it's 49 or 50 cities between 2,500 population and 10,000 population. And so because of that fiscal impact, the bill has gone to the Ways and Means Committee because it will need to be funded. So we'll be watching that and ensuring that probably one of two things will happen. They will strip out that provision because they don't want to fund it, or they will move the bill out of the Budget Committee with the necessary funding for cities to implement. So the next bill I want to talk about, the other three bills we're really focused on this session for the remainder of session are House bills. House Bill 2506 relates to residential facility siting. This is a bill that the LSC supports. It updates an existing requirement that allows residential care facilities in residential zones outright. What the bill does is it just expands the definition to include the full range of community-based behavioral health treatment facilities. that the state is currently funding and that are desperately needed to both support communities and take pressure off of the aid and assist population, off of local jails which are not serving these populations. The statute also applies to existing group homes for people with disabilities and a range of needs supported by these in-home care facilities. And the behavioral health advocates and disability rights advocates who put this bill forward worked closely with LOC on technical amendments to make sure it worked for implementation. Unfortunately, some legislators on the committee raised concerns about the proximity of these facilities near schools. And the bill was moved because of that. The bill was moved to the Rules Committee without recommendation for further consideration. So I just want to be really clear that this bill is a land use bill. It does not change existing public safety laws that prevent people with certain criminal histories from residing near schools. It has no bearing on that. So the LOC is continuing to advocate for passage of House Bill 2506 and to address any of these misunderstandings about what the bill does or doesn't do. So the next bill, House Bill 3569, this is a bill that the home builders put forward that they call right to housing. The LOC testified in opposition to this bill. It creates a host of long-term problems detrimental to communities that conflict with state goals for increasing housing production, and it would generally create greater development uncertainty. We have ongoing discussions with home builders and development stakeholders, and we understand that a main purpose of the bill is to speed up the approval process along with decreasing costs and reducing appeals and lawsuits for needed housing. So obviously the LOC shares these goals. And we have a group of brilliant and dedicated city planning experts who are continuing to meet and inform our advocacy, and will be continuing to meet with home builder development stakeholders to identify a common path forward. This bill also moved to the Rules Committee without recommendation at the work session on Tuesday. So that keeps it alive because the Rules Committee does not have session deadlines. And then finally, the governor's housing bill is 3414, which the LOC also opposed. And the bill also moved to the Rules Committee at the work session on Tuesday without recommendation. This bill would establish a new variance process for land use and design standard review. It has some exclusions for health, safety, and habitability issues, but it shifts the burden to local city staff to provide substantial evidence of this against a variance request. And the impact of that to local governments means a significant effort, additional red tape to housing production. And not all development code standards are barriers. Many of them actually create opportunity for meeting our housing needs. And the way the bill's been drafted so far and with amendments, it actually conflicts with a lot of recent state legislation and rulemaking, including housing production strategies and the ONA and the housing package that just passed, middle housing that passed in 2019, and equity and climate resilience as part of the climate friendly and equitable communities rulemaking. So the LOC and that same team of city planning experts have been providing comprehensive feedback and suggestions for improvement to the governor's office. And our goal is to identify a working solution to meet, again, what are our shared housing goals. So more to come on that, but those are the ones we're focusing on right now.
Ariel, just for those who may not necessarily know, when something's moved to Rules Committee without recommendation, does that signify anything to you? Does it mean anything, or is it just a procedural?
It is a procedural move, but it means that folks that vote to move it out of committee aren't saying that they support the bill or that they oppose the bill. They're just procedurally moving it to rules. And there were some legislators, you can go in and look at the link on the bulletin article. You can see those votes, and you can go back and watch the hearing. Some legislators will say, I have courtesy yes, like I don't like this, but I'm moving it forward. They'd rather see it die, that kind of a thing. So that's what happened with those.
Excellent. Thank you. And as always, Ariel, if you can just drop your contact information in the chat so people can reach out to you if they've got questions about those bills or any of the others that you're tracking this session for us.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ariel. So we'll give Ariel a little bit of a break, and we're going to pivot instead to Jim McCauley. Jim is our LOC Legislative Director. You're very familiar with him by this point. He's going to give us an update today on House Bill 2095, and that bill relates to photo radars. What can you tell us, Jim? Where is this bill in our process?
So I'll say good news. I think many of you who are joining us today recognize we've been trying to push this bill or a version of it for the last 3, if not 4 sessions, and have been blocked each time. We were able to get it through committee on a near unanimous vote, so that was great. So the next step in this process was a vote earlier this week So the bill actually moved off the House floor with a positive 35 to 20 vote. I was hoping for a few more, but there were some folks who were sick or who were excused that actually had committed some votes on the front end of this. This now moves to the Senate side, and it'll go straight to the floor. So I think there's quite a backlog actually in both the Senate and the House. So on Monday and Tuesday of next week, there actually won't be very many, if at all, any committee meetings. They're going to be going straight into floor sessions to try to move the backlog that they have. So my request to each of you out there is to reach out to your state senators and let them know that House Bill 2095 is very important to your community. It is a public safety bill. It will extend the authority to use mobile and fixed photo radar to every city in the state. There are only 10 cities in Oregon right now who currently have that existing authority. The other components of this really come down to the use of where that photo radar can be used in your communities. Historically, or at least the way the statute is right now, is only in high crash corridors. So effectively, you have to wait for a corridor to become a high crash corridor before you can apply it, which doesn't make any sense. So we've changed the language to focus in on high speed corridors so they don't become high crash corridors effectively. The final piece that's in this bill is adding a little bit more flexibility to local speed setting authority. We currently fought for that here a few years back. You've got it right now, but you can only do it in 5 mile per hour increments. We've been able to successfully increase that to up to 10 miles per hour in increments, so you don't have to do it twice if you need to get that speed down on those local streets by 10 miles versus the 5. So any comments forward to support this bill will be helpful. We've got, I think, a pretty high confidence that we're going to be just fine on the Senate side as well, but it never hurts to have additional support from those local communities. And I will say that during the public hearing process and during the floor speech this week from Representative Mannix, who carried the bill, he definitely referenced the number of cities that had chimed in to support the expansion of this authority. So we'd like to see that list grow, and we'd like to see more contact with with your state senators. So appreciate the support so far. Just need a little bit more of a nudge going forward.
And Jim, is it fair to assume that you need this nudge from them to happen on Monday, probably, since they're going to the floor Monday?
So it not necessarily it's going to be on the floor on Monday, so it gets in the queue at this point. My expectation is it's going to take a few more days, probably midweek will be at the earliest by the time they work through the backlog right now, and perhaps by the end of the week. But the communication definitely within Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday-ish would be terrific.
Excellent. And they can reach out to you directly if they've got questions about how best to submit that comment.
Yeah, definitely. And this is also in the bulletin article too, so all of the message points are in there.
Excellent. Thanks, Jim. We're going to pivot quickly to Michael Martin. Michael should be familiar to all of you. He's been talking to us regularly about a recycling needs assessment survey. Michael's one of our lobbyists who handles our solid waste portfolio. And Michael, I know you've given us an update on this before, but can you remind everybody why it's important for them to take the time to fill out this recycling needs assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Patty. So the local government needs assessment is part of ongoing work related to implementing the Recycling Modernization Act. And there's a lot happening with it, but what is the most important takeaway is that if cities want to be eligible for funding to expand their recycling programs, they must fill out a survey by April 14th. And there's a bulletin article that kind of goes through some of the details of that. But the high level thing here is that if you are looking or interested in expanding your recycling and want funding for that, you must have this survey completed by April 14th. And I just want to say that it's also okay if you're like unsure, or if you haven't worked with the PROs, that you are able to, you can err on the side of more rather than less, and that stuff can be worked out. But just the main thing, make sure you complete this survey by April 14th and receive confirmation that it's been completed so you can receive funding. So there's a bulletin article detailing a lot more of that.
Michael, just for those who may not know, what is PRO?
Producer responsibility organizations.
And then if cities have questions, do you have a list of those who have completed it by any chance?
Yes, I do have a list of folks that have completed it. I received notification from DEQ that 149 cities have either started or completed this survey. So I can, I'm not sure what you want to do there, but happy to.
Yeah, so if somebody needs to double check about whether or not they've completed it, they
Yeah.
could contact you.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'll put
Perfect.
my contact information in the chat.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael. Make sure you guys fill that out. We've got about a week left to get all those cities signed up for that potential funding source. We're going to switch away from talking about recycling surveys and pivot to broadband. Nolan, if you're on the line, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself and go on camera. Nolan Plescia is the LOC lobbyist who covers our broadband, telecommunications, and energy portfolio. He's given us several updates already this session on broadband proposals and legislations. Where are we today with broadband, Nolan? What do we need to know?
Thank you. As I talked to everybody last week, we were able to get House Bill 3201A through the House. It's now in the Senate and got a referral this week to the Senate Committee on Veterans, Emergency Management, Federal and World Affairs, which is definitely a mouthful. We are asking LOC members to contact their senators to ask them to support House Bill 3201A and encourage quick passage through the Senate. While we had strong bipartisan vote last week in the House, we know it's going to be a tough road ahead. LOC members did have a strong impact in the House, and we hope that we can reproduce that in the Senate. So thank you all very much for that. You can see this week's bulletin for more information and talking points that you can use. One of the things I wanted to bring up is a major challenge that we are facing in this next phase around whether or not to define broadband speeds in statute versus having the Oregon Broadband Advisory Council debate and decide appropriate speeds based on technology advancements and varying funding sources. We believe that putting speeds in statute is just bad policy. After 2 years of negotiations, the legislature finally passed our current speeds in 2020. Even though we learned at the time, many experts were saying that those speeds we were adopting were lower than what people were already expecting us to move to. That is 25 megabytes per second download and 3 megabytes per second upload for underserved and 10/1 for unserved. And what folks spoke about at that time is we really should be focusing on 100/20, which is what most federal programs have already adopted. As noted, less than 3 years later, we're having the same debate, and my worry is twofold. When we adopt speeds in statute, we are sending a signal to those communities that with those speeds that they are already served. And as we noticed during the pandemic, many of our rural and frontier communities that know very well that this is simply not true. And when we define these speeds, we send a strong signal that entities building out broadband only need to focus on those speeds instead of going much further. And this really hurts our rural and frontier and historically underserved communities the most. We already have communities that are focusing towards 1 gigabyte of service now, and many services and constituencies are asking their ISPs, which is internet service providers, to build up to 1 gig of service. So it really seems ridiculous for us to put in statute and aim much lower at 100/20 when communities are going to be building out in the next 2 to 5 years. So opposition is really pushing hard to get these definitions in statutes. We believe the Oregon Broadband Advisory Council is the appropriate location with experts that are from geographically diverse communities across Oregon and represent varying public and private entities. And it is also not uncommon to use these kind of mechanisms to define speed. So we are asking our members today to reach out to their senators, encourage them to support, sign on, and urge quick passage of House Bill 3201A as is, and to move it to the floor. And if you have not already done so and have not signed on to our coalition letter, We are still accepting logos to be posted on the Senate side, so please send me your logo as soon as possible.
Thanks, Nolan. So you mentioned briefly that it's going to be tough in the Senate. Is there a particular reason you think it's going to be tough, or a particular type of opposition that the members should know about?
Yeah, so I would say the strongest opposition is coming from the Oregon Cable Telecommunications Associations, and they have a lot of pull on with some of our Senate colleagues or Senate members. And they are really trying to push these definitional speeds because they are arguing that we need to ensure that it goes to unserved and underserved communities, which is true. But one thing we know is that when we put these speeds directly in statute and don't have the flexibility to change it, we are also putting those communities at risk of being stuck at those speeds while others continue to pass them in our urban areas. So we really want to emphasize that having the Broadband Advisory Council have that flexibility to change these speeds when the need arises, as technology changes quickly, as different funding sources. And frankly, just because I think it's important that Oregon is able to kind of set its own path. We don't want our members stuck at lower speeds 2 to 5 years from now, just because that's what we put into statute.
Excellent. Thanks, Nolan. And if you can also, I know you always do, but drop your information, already beat me to it. Nolan's information's in the chat. If you've got more questions about this bill or need assistance on how you can work with your senator to provide support for a quick passage, just take a look at your chat and go ahead and give Nolan a shout out later this week or early next week. And speaking of technology, not the same, but at least technologically related, we're going to talk about drones. Scott Winkle, who is our general governance lobby, has updated you before on Senate Bill 812, which deals with a city's ability to prohibit takeoff and landings of drones in their parks. Scott, you've talked about this before, but where do things stand with this bill today? What do the members need to know?
So thank you, Patty. And I think we're actually in really good shape with this bill. It's on the floor, and I'm actually putting a note in the chat right now with a quick talking point. I think the votes are there for the bill, but it's been a long time since this bill got reported out of committee in terms of legislative calendar. So I am going to ask members to reach out and make some soft touches with their state senators and ask them to support the bill. What it does is it gives cities and the other public agencies, local governments who own parks, the ability to, by resolution or ordinance, regulate the takeoff and landing of drones. This is about as much authority as the FAA says we have. Anything beyond takeoff is considered navigable airspace by them and in their purview. And so it does the ordinance, an ordinance adopted by the agency would have to do a couple of things. It would have to allow utilities for takeoff and landing so they can inspect their lines. We thought that was reasonable given the co-location of utility lines in some parks, and that these are also often public agencies. You couldn't prohibit, obviously, and nobody here would want to prohibit drones for emergency operations. So if you have a search and rescue incident or a fire or a police involvement, they would be free to use the park, and then offer an affirmative defense for an emergency landing. I was a little nervous about that one, but Amazon was really insistent that they're going to have drones delivering stuff.
Scott, can you repeat what you just said? I think you blanked out a little bit on internet, maybe the last 20 seconds.
Oh, sorry. And so the last thing that the bill ordinance would have to do is give an affirmative defense in the event someone had to make an emergency landing. So Amazon wanted that one, which is a little nerve-wracking, but okay. So your Prime package is going to be airdropped to you now. So I think, like I said, I think we're in good shape. The bill came out of the committee unanimously, but there was some opposition to it, and it's been a long time since anyone's really thought about this because of the way the Senate calendar works. So that's the ask. The notes in the chat. I'm going to put my contact in there for any questions. Again, we're not pulling the fire alarm on this one. This is just a little this is just a little reminder that this is a good bill and should pass.
Thank you, Scott. I'd just like to point out to the members, twice today, you've heard lobbyists say either the words good news or really good shape. So, we don't hear that very often in these webinars. So it's been a good day. So thank you, Scott. I'm going to ask Lindsay Tennis if she can unmute herself and turn her camera on. Lindsay is our lobbyist who handles our tax and finance portfolio. She's got 3 separate things she's going to update us on today. The first of which will be House Bill 2663, which is related to regionally significant industrial sites. She's also going to give an overview to everybody of LOC's priority budget requests that we're making to the legislature. And she's going to remind everyone about the upcoming Ways and Means Committee Roadshow and how you all can participate in that roadshow. Lindsay, let's start with House Bill 2663. What can you tell us?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Patty. And it's actually, so there are 2 bills that extended the regionally significant industrial site program. The bill number here is actually House Bill 2258, was the one that passed out of committee. So this bill extends the sunset of the regionally significant industrial site program. And this is a profit sharing mechanism where the state will offer reimbursements for the cost of readying industrial land. And it's a reimbursement for income that's generated on the site once a company is employing people and that income tax is coming back to the state. And so this bill has that sunset extension in it. And then it also creates a new industrial site loan fund. And so this program, local governments or private owners can apply for funds either through a forgivable loan or the purchase of bonds. So that's, adds more flexibility to industrial site readiness that is not currently available in the RISA's program. And the original idea here was to add this $40 million to the industrial site loan fund that was created in the big semiconductor bill, but that loan fund was more specific to the semiconductor industry. So that's why this bill had a new loan fund created for it, very similar to the one that was created for the semiconductor package. But this is more broad than just the semiconductor industry. And so this bill allocates $40 million to that program. It got passed out of its policy committee unanimously, and now it will sit in Ways and Means to be, considered against all the other budget bills that sit in Ways and Means until we figure out what happens at the end of session.
Is there anything our members could do to help with this bill right now, Lindsay, or are we in a holding pattern for now?
That's a good question. Yeah. Let me think about that one and I'll answer it next week.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And then kind of still talking about money, particularly since this is your portfolio we're discussing today, LOC is going to be submitting a priority budget request. Can you explain to the members what that even means, why we do it, what's included, where it goes, just generally kind of explain what that is and why we're doing it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so LOC has created our budget priorities that we will submit to the co-chairs of the Ways and Means Committee. And so what we've done is take the 8 legislative priorities that all of you have identified and then fit budget items into those 8 items based on what we have all heard from you that you most want. So the first priority is infrastructure, financing, and resilience and funding for critical infrastructure for needed housing. Mouthful, but you all know that this is one of our top priorities. So we're requesting $100 million to go into the Special Public Works Fund for local funding to address homelessness. I think you all are very familiar with the OMA proposal and the amazing work that Ariel has done there. So that budget request is for $193.5 million. And then also in local funding to address homelessness, the Water and Sewer Ratepayer Assistance Fund, $15 million. Under Community Resiliency and Wildfire Planning for wildfire resources, $3 million to the Municipal Wildfire Assistance Program, $40 million to the Community Wildfire Risk Reduction Program. Under Transportation Safety Enhancement, we're asking for $15 million to go to the Great Streets Program. And then under full funding and alignment for state land use initiatives, we're asking for $6.3 million for the ONA House Bill 2001 that Ariel has been working on, $50 million for local development capacity, and $30 million for CFEC implementation. And so we will send this letter to the co-chairs of Ways and Means. We also will sit down with them and explain all of these in more detail. But we're just, we're trying to get as many LOC priorities funded in the state budget as we possibly can. And then dovetailing on that, there's a Ways and Means roadshow. So these dates have already been published in the bulletin. The first one is actually tomorrow morning in Portland at the Portland Community College Sylvania campus. It starts at 10 a.m. And this will be an opportunity to get in front of the co-chairs of the Ways and Means committee that decide how the entire general fund for the state budget is spent. So if you can make it to any of these roadshow hearings, that's great. And we encourage you to use the budget priorities document as a starting point, but also just to, tell the story of your city and the circumstance that you're in. I think it can be a really good storytelling opportunity and to build that relationship between cities and the state, because I think often we see a disconnect between the state not understanding the financial constraints that cities are under. So, sometimes I might give you like a minute up there to talk, but as much as you can get across the story of your city and your needs and the financial situation that cities are under and why cities need help, I think the better.
And I think you mentioned this, Lindsay, but do we have those dates coming out in the bulletin so people can readily find them?
Yes, and I will drop this in the chat also.
Excellent. Thank you so much for all your work, Lindsay.
Mhm.
We're going to finish off today with our Legislative Director, Jim McCauley. He's going to kind of give us an overview of where things stand generally with the current session and how things are going. Jim, what can you report?
Yeah, thank you again. So this is a great time to just kind of remind folks where we're at. We passed the halfway point effectively in session this week, 81 days in, pretty major deadline. Effectively what takes place after this first chamber deadline or first chamber of origin is a lot of bills drop off the table. So we had north of 4,500 bills, resolutions, and memorials that were introduced during or on the front end of the session. And right now, when you look at it, you've got just shy of 250 that remain active in the House and 212 that are active in the Senate. So a pretty sizable hit on a lot of policy issues and a lot of other elements and stuff that we have been tracking throughout this process. Only 30 of the bills have actually passed both chambers, and 18 have been signed by the governor at this point in time. So there is still a long way to go. The second chamber deadline comes up in the middle of May, on May 19th. And that too is a critical point on really where the, I'll say the sprint to the finish goes, or in some cases, sitting on a couch and waiting for things to happen also takes place. And I think what's really important for folks to understand, and it's great to see a pretty consistent, I'll say attendance for these Friday calls, because it's our messaging, I think, is clearly getting out. I think folks understand the value of getting these weekly updates. Is our grassroots response remains incredibly critical. So please take the time to stay in contact with your state elected officials, attend their coffees, attend their town halls, and make sure that they continue to see the faces of local government leaders. LOC does not have PAC money, and we are facing all sorts of interest groups out there that have a different of opinion on what local government decision-making should look like. But what we do have is we have community faces, we have community leaders, and you've done a great job so far. So make sure you keep it up. And that's really the message I wanted to articulate, because we hear this more than you realize. the importance of your contact with elected officials. I mentioned earlier on, I heard it earlier this week on the floor when you had a state representative who was presenting, again, House Bill 2095 and talking about the contact or the record that was built off of a lot of local governments supporting bills. So it works, and that grassroots involvement is going to be incredibly critical on this last half of our session going forward.
Thank you, Jim. And speaking of critical assistance from the membership, I apologize, I skipped this when we were talking to Ariel about housing and land use. But we've been asked to work with the state and the Association of Oregon Counties to produce and distribute and collect information on shelter funding in terms of the shelters that cities have stood up and are looking to fund. Ariel, can you kind of explain what the survey is and what we need from members and how it could potentially help us as we try and roll out this session and get some needed funding for our members?
Thanks, Patty. Yeah, so the LOC and the AOC sent out a survey yesterday. We're looking specifically for information on gaps in shelter funding. So if you have a shelter or a navigation center currently under development and there's a gap, you've had inflationary costs in your project that you didn't predict, and the original funding you got isn't going to be enough to finish the project, we're looking for that information. If there are existing shelter or more than one shelters, navigation centers in your community, and you have funding that's running out at a specific date, whether that was ARPA funding or other sources, state funding, we need that information. The survey was sent to all city CEOs, so that's city managers, city administrators, recorders, as well as mayors yesterday. It's also, you can see, you can find more information about it in the bulletin today, and there's a PDF version of the survey that you can review, but please email me if you need the link to submit. The state turns out really doesn't have a comprehensive understanding of what those funding gaps are, and so your cities and counties are going to be providing that to the state. It's a pretty quick turnaround. We need these filled out by the end of day next Friday, so just a week. Hopefully it's fairly simple to submit. We're looking for basic information, and then, you know, if they need follow-up information, the state and the governor's office can follow up from there, or we may reach out. But we're just trying to get these basic 3 points of information. I don't know if I mentioned the third one is if you don't have a shelter and navigation center and your city or region needs one, and you have a plan or an idea or the start of something, you also can describe that there. So if you want a copy to share with your partners, you're strongly encouraged to work with your service provider partners to get the relevant details if you don't have them. That PDF again is in today's bulletin, or you can email me, and just looking for that baseline information. Thank you so much. And I should say this is only going to strengthen our OMA, Oregon Mayors Association proposal, and any of that funding conversation is the key part of that.
So thanks, Ariel. And just to reiterate, we only send it to the CEOs so we don't get duplicative survey responses from the same cities. Is that correct?
That's correct. And there may be some overlap between counties and cities. It's the same survey. So the one that the counties sent out, it's the same link to the Google survey. So, you know, if we get some duplication, that's fine. We'll figure it out. But if you are able to coordinate, that does make it easier on our end.
Perfect. And don't go too far, Ariel. We're pivoting into the Q&A portion of today's events. I know everybody's probably old hat at this, but please remember that this is an opportunity for questions, not comments. We do ask that everybody restrict their questions to one at a time. If you have multiple questions, we'll try and circle back with you before we end. And we do our best to start with member cities. I'm going to go a little out of order since Ariel's still here. I think that you've already said it, but we do have a question from Courtney Knox Bush. Ariel, do you know where the survey was directed? I think you answered that already, but can you just reiterate it one more time?
Sure. Once again, the survey went to all county commissioners, all city CEOs, and city mayors.
Great. And then Nancy Brewer, who's the city manager for the city of Lebanon, says that Lynn County MAC was asking communities to respond to the AOC ask. Should we provide the data to both the county and the LOC?
It's the same survey link, so you can fill it out both as the city and the county if you like. We're going to try and consolidate that information. If you want to just do one for all cities within a county, if you've got that collaboration, that's great as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Ariel. Very much appreciated. The first question I actually saw in Mayor Beatty of Milwaukee. I apologize, I didn't go to you first like I normally would, but I did have Ariel already up. Mayor Beatty has a question for you, Nolan, related to 3201A. The question from Mayor Beatty in the chat, Nolan, if you can't see it, was there was very little opposition in the public hearings, only from current providers, it seemed. Is that what you expect by way of opposition in the Senate?
Yes, I would say the opposition is small, but they're also powerful. These are industry lobbyists. They represent folks that, frankly, put a lot of money towards a lot of these campaigns. And they have the ability to really reach out and get to a lot of different members. I'll also note that on this committee right now, one of the senators on the committee is out of action. And will probably remain out of action for the next 2 weeks at least, maybe longer, which means we only have 4 legislators on the committee right now. So it means our margin for error is really low on that committee to get this out. Again, we had some strong bipartisan support in the House side, and we expect that we'll have some on the Senate side. We did have 2 senators testify on the House side in support of the bill. That was Senator Brock Smith and Senator Weber. So we expect to have that again, but I think, we're really just trying to make a strong push to not do anything with the bill. I know there's some folks that would like to make some changes still, and we really just want to indicate to them that the bill is good as is. We would like folks to sign on and just move it quickly.
Thank you, Nolan. I'm not seeing anybody with their hand raised or any more questions popping up in the chat. We do still have time. While I'm waiting to see if anybody else does, I'll just make a few quick announcements. First of all, a reminder that next week's legislative webinar will happen same time, same proverbial place, Friday at noon. Please make sure that you tune in for that. If you can't attend any of our legislative webinars live, please know that if you go to the League's legislative advocacy page on our website, you can download any of these recordings at any time and watch or listen at your own particular leisure. The second one, I've announced this a couple times, but our spring conference is scheduled for April 25th and 26th at the Seaside Convention Center. We were going to close registration today, but in all honesty, due to the heavy demand from our members of who wants to attend and our ability to maneuver some of the layout, we're going to extend that registration for 1 more week. So if you are interested and have been thinking about attending the spring conference, you have 7 more days essentially to register for that event. You can do it from the League's website. It's right on our homepage right now. Additionally, we did take a short pause in the regional meetings that are being hosted by LOC President Steve Calloway. Mayor Calloway is the mayor of Hillsborough, and he is traveling to all 12 regions of the state within the first 6 months of his presidency with our organization. The next 3 regional meetings are on April 17th in Chiloquin. That is a rescheduled event for one that we had to cancel due to some blizzard conditions in the past earlier this year. April 19th in Pendleton, and April 20th in Nyssa. If you're interested in attending any of these events, you can register for these regional meetings on the LOC's website. You can find them from our events calendar or our training link on the website. And speaking of training, if you or anyone with your city is interested in learning about or receiving training on urban renewal agencies, we will be offering an urban renewal training scheduled for May 4th. It's a virtual training. All are welcome to attend. You can find information on that on our training page located on the LOC website. And a lot of the lobbyists mentioned multiple times today, there was additional information in our bulletin. We release the electronic bulletin every Friday during the legislative session. We have a particular session devoted to important bills members need to track. It is emailed directly to each of you. So please feel free to make sure that you sign up for that so that you can continue getting it. It does look like there might be some more information coming on here in the chat. So I just want to maybe double check. There is one question. It is from Eric Rutledge. Has the term variance in quotation marks been defined for House Bill 3414, and what standards could be modified? That's a question for you, I believe, Ariel.
Sure, that's a great question. No, the term variance is not defined in the bill, and that's part of our feedback to the governor's office that it should be defined because cities already have any number of variances, adjustments, waivers in their development process. And we want to make sure this isn't conflicting with those existing processes, or we're not really sure how it's intended to overlay with those. But basically the way the bill is structured, it would allow a developer to request a variance for almost anything. They started with just an exclusion for public health and safety. They've since added density. They've since added some environmental protections, but the list keeps growing of things that need to be excluded. And even with that exclusion list, or it would give cities the ability to deny a variance based on one of those things. But even with that, it shifts the burden to cities would then have to document findings with substantial evidence to demonstrate the need to deny the variance. So that's a considerable amount of increase in work, bureaucracy, paperwork, time in the development process. So it really feels like it's not going to meet the intent of the bill as we understand it, which is to streamline and expedite development processes. So.
Thanks, Ariel. I've got another question from the city manager of Oregon, Aaron Palmquist. He asked, Ariel, what should or can we do in light of home rule?
Well, we've been making the case that, and trying to explain to legislators how the current land use system works, which is very much based on home rule and local design, local communities, to reflect and the realities of the unique differences in built environments and how and land use planning at the local level. Certainly these bills erode that. And so we're making that case that this does not work with home rule and with the way the land use system has been set up. So it's absolutely part of the conversation.
Thanks, Ariel. Do we have any more questions? Corvallis City, I think Council, Paul Schaefer has a question. His hand's raised. Councilor Schaefer, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. If you want to unmute yourself.
I did. You got it just right. Thank you.
Perfect.
It's a question for Jim, I suppose. If you go to the OLAS website, it's still listing thousands and thousands of bills. And I wonder if there is some place that has a short list of the bills that are still alive, so we can go through a more reasonable, sane list of things that we can try to track. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. I wish it was an easy answer for you. On OLAS, it really doesn't have that capability of being able to just tell you, pushing a button as an example and say what's left, what's live. There are bill trackers and things of that nature that we end up using that can give us some sense on what's live. And I will see what I can do to produce some kind of a document and be able to ship out to folks here in the next week on what that looks like and stuff. We can run some sorts and things of that nature. It's not necessarily always the best end result because there are limitations with running some of these databases and some of the sorts, but we'll do our best to come up with something.
Okay, thanks for making the effort.
Thank you for the question, Councilor. Thanks, Jim, for the answer. Do I have anybody else on the call who has a question that they would like to pose of LOC lobbying staff? I'm not seeing any hands raised. I am not seeing any other questions in the chat. I would do just one more plug for the Seaside Conference. It's going to be a good time, so I hope to see everybody there in 2 weeks. We will end 12 minutes early today since there's no more questions and everybody can maybe start their Friday and weekend earlier. Thank you for all that you do for your cities. Thanks for all the support you've given the lobbyists this session. Stay safe and keep doing the good work that you all do. Have a great one.